Hey everyone, welcome. Let me ask you something. Has your heart ever pounded just thinking about a looming deadline? Or have you ever struggled to quiet your mind when everything feels overwhelming? If so, you're definitely not alone. Anxiety is, well, everywhere it seems. And today we're going to really dive into its complex and actually quite fascinating story.
You know, Autumn, it always makes me wonder, did people back in the 1800s have the same anxieties we do? Or was their anxiety more along the lines of, how do I not get eaten by a wolf? I'm guessing we've just gotten more creative with what we worry about.
That's such a great point, Rachel, because that's pretty much what Scott Stossel explores in his book, My Age of Anxiety. It's part memoir, part history lesson, and part deep dive into the science of anxiety. Stossel talks about his own lifelong struggles with anxiety. Think panic attacks, phobias, even trying out different medications. And then connects that to a broader view of how anxiety has shaped our culture, neuroscience, and even the medical industry itself.
Okay, I'm definitely intrigued. It's like half personal crisis, half historical analysis. Sounds like a cocktail of intellectual dread and, dare I say, a sprinkle of hope.
Exactly. And here's our plan for today. First, we'll look at the roots of anxiety. Where does it come from, really? And how have different eras tried to understand it? Second, we'll explore the very personal impact anxiety has, how our genes and emotions mix together to shape each individual's experience. And third, the good stuff. Is there any treatment, from talk therapy to new techniques, that can truly help us navigate all this chaos?
So, a history lesson, a therapy session, and a peek inside the medicine cabinet all rolled into one. Got it. Let's see if we can actually make sense of this anxiety roller coaster.
Okay, picking up on that anxiety roller coaster, let's dive into the million-dollar question. What exactly is anxiety? You know, philosophers like Søren Kierkegaard would argue it's way more than just a feeling. It's a fundamental human condition. He famously called it the dizziness of freedom. Pretty profound, right?
The dizziness of freedom? That sounds like a terrible slogan for an amusement park. What's he actually getting at?
Well, think about it this way. We humans are uniquely aware of our ability to make choices. And, well, the fact that we're all heading toward that inevitable end. Kierkegaard believed anxiety is our reaction to realizing we're free to make huge, life-changing decisions, but can't actually control the outcome. It's that tension between limitless possibility and our own mortality.
So you're saying anxiety is like the brain's version of a 404 error when faced with too many options? That actually makes sense. Ever tried choosing a toothpaste at the drugstore? Total existential dread.
Exactly. But, and this is key, he also argued that anxiety wasn't all bad. Sure, it can be paralyzing, but it can also push you to confront your fears and, grow. He saw it almost as a rite of passage on the road to self-awareness.
Okay, I get the philosophical angle. But didn't people, like Freud, come along later and give anxiety a more clinical, psychological spin?
Absolutely. Freud differentiated anxiety from fear by highlighting a key difference. Fear stems from something concrete, like a visible threat, while anxiety is this free-floating thing that seemingly has no clear external trigger. He thought it came from internal conflicts, subconscious battles raging within us.
So, Freud viewed anxiety as an emotional Cold War being fought inside our heads? Interesting. And how has that held up as we've learned more about the brain?
Well, the modern view now tries to connect Freud's ideas to, actual brain biology. Our amygdala, that almond-shaped structure in the brain, it basically goes haywire during anxiety. It's evolution's way of keeping us on high alert, but as one researcher, Michel Dugas, put it, it's like having an allergy to uncertainty. Basically, even small uncertainties can feel like life or death situations, even if they aren't.
Like when I can't remember if I locked the door and suddenly I'm picturing burglars stealing all my stuff. Evolution seriously needs an upgrade.
I hear you. And it's wild to see this tendency documented for centuries. Take George Chaney back in the 18th century. He coined the English malady to describe all these cases of nervous exhaustion, which he linked to the stresses of industrialization and fast-paced lifestyle changes. It was almost like he was saying that anxiety isn't just personal, it's also cultural.
So, the Industrial Revolution stressed people out with factories and smog, and now modern life stresses people out with Wi-Fi and work emails. Plus a change, eh?
Exactly, right? Every era reinterprets anxiety based on its unique stressors. I mean, in the mid-20th century, post-World War II, you had W.H. Auden writing The Age of Anxiety. That poem captured the collective unease of a world trying to come to terms with modernization, economic shifts, and the, existential fallout from a global conflict.
Poetry as therapy for an anxious world. A classic. So, we're starting to see anxiety move beyond the individual, becoming more of a, shall we say, societal diagnosis.
Precisely. And you see it represented by the rise of self-help books, like Dale Carnegie's How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. That book was practically a survival guide for navigating post-war consumerism and all those social expectations. I mean, anxiety had shifted from being a private thing to a mainstream topic.
Let me guess. Every generation since then has convinced itself, we're the most anxious generation ever.
Bingo. Take Edwin Lee, a 19th century British physician. He declared that nervous complaints prevail at the present day to an extent unknown at any former period. Sound familiar?
So essentially, every era has its own anxiety anthem. Victorians had nervous exhaustion. Post-war Americans had the age of anxiety. And today we have fear of running out of phone battery.
Pretty much. But here's the twist. Although every generation believes its anxiety is unprecedented, the core experience remains the same. It's about uncertainty, change, and that never-ending human struggle to, try and control the chaos.
So, anxiety is both timeless and a shapeshifter, adapting to whatever flavor of chaos is trending. Which begs the question, are we actually any better at handling it now than people were back then?
So, shifting from the science of anxiety to how it plays out in someone's life, we have Scott Stossel. His story really brings home the personal side of anxiety, how it affects everything from daily routines to relationships, and even how it's passed down through families.
Okay, personal anxiety stories. Let me guess, Autumn. Mortifying school dance? Still terrified of clowns?
Try a fear of throwing up amid a phobia. Seriously controlled Scott's life, pushing him to extreme measures to avoid the slightest chance of nausea. And it went way beyond that. He also dealt with generalized anxiety, panic attacks, dreaded public speaking. The list goes on.
Hang on, so it's not just standard public speaking jitters? He was genuinely afraid his own body would betray him?
Exactly. One example that really stands out is his wedding day. Most people remember it as this beautiful experience. He called it a theater of despair. Imagine standing in front of 300 guests, sweating bullets, your legs shaking so badly you're convinced you're about to collapse, and your biggest worry isn't messing up your vows, but holding back nausea.
That sounds utterly awful. Weddings are stressful enough without your body staging a revolt in real time. Did he actually make it through the ceremony? Or was there an emergency exit strategy involved?
He somehow pulled it off but was emotionally wiped out. And it didn't end there. his anxiety followed him into his career, especially with public speaking. It was basically a recurring horror show of heart palpitations, sweating, and fear of being judged. And the kicker? He's a journalist. So talking to people is kind of part of the job description.
Of course, he picks journalism. That's like someone who's afraid of fire becoming a firefighter. How did he even manage?
That's the big question. He got through it with willpower, and also with a lot of trial and error with medications, therapy, and even some alternative treatments. But as he points out, anxiety doesn't just vanish. You learn to live with it. But yeah, you can see how it kind of colored every experience, big or small.
Right, so anxiety basically stole his joy for life's big moments and turned everyday tasks into Herculean feats. I get why he was looking for the deeper why behind it all.
Exactly. Which led him to a major discovery. It was a family affair. His mother, his daughter, even traces in his great-grandfather Chester, who struggled with pretty severe mental health problems, including breakdowns marked by intense dread. Seeing that pattern helps Scott understand that anxiety isn't just about experiences. It's often inherited.
Hold on a second. His great-grandfather had these major analysis paralysis moments. And Stossel is dealing with something strangely similar?
That's the picture. Chester's experience also highlights something important about how treatment has changed. Back then, treatments were pretty basic and stigmatized. Early psychiatry, isolation, a lot of misunderstanding. Fast forward to Stossel's life and you have modern therapies, medication, and more awareness. But the underlying struggle, it feels the same.
So, even with all the upgrades in treatment, the experience itself feels quite familiar. But did he find the origin of the anxiety? Nature or nurture?
Classic combo. Behavioral geneticist Kenneth Kendler found that about 30% of the variation in anxiety levels is genetic. And Jerome Kagan's research showed that high reactive infants, babies who are easily upset by loud noises or new environments, are more prone to anxiety later in life. They're practically born pre-wired.
High reactive infants? Sounds like baby Stossel might have been clutching his rattle a little too tightly.
Maybe. And obviously, those natural tendencies interact with environmental factors. Stossel tried to shield his daughter from his own fears, like hiding his emetophobia. But she still picked up on some of that dread, even with his efforts. That's the tough part, right? You can't necessarily control the cycle entirely.
So even if you create a safe environment, genetics can still win. Parenting on anxiety level 100.
Exactly. Which brings us to this universal thing about anxiety. While Stossel's experiences are, of course, unique to him, anxiety's ability to isolate, silence, and stigmatize is also very widespread. His therapist, Dr. W., really nailed it when he asked, "You've been hiding this for years. How's that working out for you?"
Ouch, that's a direct hit. I'm guessing the answer wasn't fantastic, actually.
Not at all. Hiding anxiety often makes it worse. There's the pressure to appear cool and collected, which then creates even more shame and self-criticism. Stossel found that being open about it was transformative. When he shared his story, people connected with him. It's like that simple act turned something so personal into something really human.
Hold on, so anxiety can be both a burden and a connection? Like what started as isolating became a bridge to other people?
Exactly. Anxiety connects the personal with the collective experiences. Stossel's story isn't just his. It's showing us how anxiety works on a universal level. Individual experiences shape it, but the common themes like uncertainty, control, vulnerability are what pull us all together.
So in the end, it's less my anxiety and more our anxiety. A shared legacy, even it's not exactly one we'd choose.
So, after diving deep into personal stories, we're moving into the science and philosophy behind it all. Next up, how we treat anxiety, how resilience helps us recover, and why community is so vital in healing. We'll look at how treatments have changed over time, then explore resilience strategies, and finally, examine the collective healing that Stossel talks about.
All right, let's get to the juicy stuff. Treatments. Please tell me we've moved beyond take a swig of this and hope for the best.
Oh, definitely. Though the journey hasn't been a straight line. Early treatments were pretty experimental, and some were downright dangerous. Take barbiturates, for instance. Popular in the early 20th century, they were prescribed to calm the nerves. And they did work, for a bit. But they were seriously addictive, causing more problems than they solved, leading to overdoses and dependency.
So it was like fighting fire with gasoline. Seemed helpful at first, but ultimately a disaster.
Exactly. The quest for better solutions led to meprobamate, better known as Milltown, in the 1950s. It was the first major tranquilizer marketed to the masses, nicknamed Mother's Little Helper. It promised relief in a rapidly changing post-war world, where modernization and industrial pressures were causing widespread unease.
Let me guess. Milltown ads showed smiling housewives effortlessly managing laundry, kids, and their anxiety?
Pretty much. It even popped up in pop culture, with celebrities touting it as a miracle cure for stress. But here's where things shifted. Anxiety became a consumer product. The message was no longer about dealing with anxiety, but about chemically eliminating it. This paved the way for the pharmaceutical industry's focus on mental health.
So, anxiety becomes a commodity, and suddenly we're popping pills to cope with daily life. Sounds unsettling. And I'm guessing it didn't stop there.
Nope. Then came the 1980s and SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Prozac became the poster child, promoted as a safe, long-term solution for anxiety and depression by balancing serotonin levels in the brain. Unlike previous treatments that just calmed symptoms, SSRIs, in theory, targeted the underlying neurochemical issues.
Let me jump in here. Are we talking about fixing chemical imbalances, or was that more of a marketing slogan?
Good question. The chemical imbalance theory was a simplification, but it made treatment easier to understand for a wider audience. Prozac's popularity exploded, and many found relief. But it also raised ethical questions. Were we overdiagnosing anxiety or turning it into a profit-driven industry? Were we medicalizing normal human emotions just to sell pills?
So something meant to help opened a Pandora's box of overprescription and, dare I say, pharmaceutical dominance.
Precisely. And those ethical questions are still around today. That's why modern approaches don't just rely on medication. Today's treatments are multifaceted. Psychotherapy, lifestyle changes, mindfulness, all designed to manage both the symptoms of anxiety and the patterns that keep it going. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, for example, is now a gold standard. It helps people identify and challenge distorted thinking patterns, like catastrophizing.
Which is basically your brain saying, the printer jammed. Therefore, I'll never succeed at my job, ever. CBT stops that.
That's the goal. And exposure therapy, a type of CBT, is particularly effective. It involves gradually facing your fears. Someone terrified of flying might start by sitting on a plane with the engines off, then work up to a short flight. It's uncomfortable, but can really rewire the brain's anxiety response.
So we've gone from sedatives to brain immersion training. Makes you wonder, are meds like Prozac outdated? Or is it about finding a balance?
It's definitely about balance. Medications can provide a foundation for calming severe anxiety, giving people the stability to engage in therapies like CBT or mindfulness. Mindfulness practices, learning to focus on the present moment, have shown great promise in managing anxiety.
That sounds refreshingly practical. Like, forget the what-ifs and just focus on your breathing. Simple, but easier said than done. Let me guess. Meditation apps are booming, right?
Absolutely. Pairing technology like apps with solid mindfulness principles makes these tools more accessible. And that reflects a bigger trend. Modern treatments incorporate both scientific advances and the wisdom of older traditions, allowing for holistic healing.
Okay, so treatments have evolved. Less cure-all pill and more team effort. Let's switch to resilience. How does that fit in? Because most anxious people I know don't feel very resilient in the moment.
Resilience isn't something you're born with. It's built, shaped by personal strategies and support. Social connection is huge. Studies consistently show that strong relationships, friends, family, community, significantly reduce anxiety. People feel less alone when they know others are there for them.
Right, like in Stossel's story. His anxiety was crippling, but opening up turned isolation into solidarity. Makes perfect sense. Hearing someone else say, "Oh, I've been through that too," changes everything.
Exactly. Sharing struggles eases individual burdens and challenges social stigmas. People realize they're not broken, they're human. And then there's optimism, a skill that can be learned and is linked to better stress resilience. When people see setbacks as temporary or manageable, it changes how they cope with anxiety.
So optimism is the mental armor and community is the emergency backup. Anything else boost resilience?
Purposeful engagement is another key. Finding meaning in something beyond yourself. Volunteering, pursuing a passion, even just helping others can shift focus from internal worries and create a sense of fulfillment.
So, to recap, treatments handle the "why can't I breathe right now" moments, while resilience prepares you for the long haul. But what about collective healing? You mentioned that earlier.
Collective healing is where the magic happens. Anxiety thrives on isolation, and community breaks that cycle. When Stossel started talking about his anxiety publicly, it wasn't just therapeutic for him. It was transformative for others. Sharing experiences normalizes the conversation, fosters empathy, and breaks down the stigma around mental health.
So Stossel's story isn't just his, it's ours. Anxiety isolates, but these shared moments turn it into something we face together. Fascinating.
Okay, so let's bring it all together. We've really taken a deep dive into the world of anxiety, haven't we? We started with those philosophical ideas, like Kierkegaard's dizziness of freedom, and then moved through Freud's theories and our modern understanding of the brain. It's wild how much things like industrialization and consumerism have shaped anxiety on a societal level. It all boils down to this tension between wanting control and dealing with uncertainty, right?
Right, and then there's the personal side of things. Remember Scott Stossel's book and how vividly he describes his own anxiety? From his phobia of throwing up to public speaking and even those family genes. It really shows you that anxiety isn't just about what's happening around you. It's a part of who we are, both biologically and culturally, isn't it?
Exactly. And we also talked about how treatment has changed over time. From tranquilizers way back when to SSRIs, and now these more holistic approaches like CBT and mindfulness. It seems like managing anxiety isn't about finding a quick fix. It's more about finding a balance. Medication if needed, therapy, learning how to be resilient, and really leaning on your support system.
So that leads to a bigger point, doesn't it? Anxiety can make you feel like you're all alone. but it's also one of the most human things we experience. When we share those feelings, like Stossel did, we connect with each other. There's strength in knowing you're not the only one going through it.
Absolutely. So maybe the next time you feel anxious, instead of trying to ignore it, try to listen to what it's telling you. Who else might be feeling the same way? Normalize it, talk about it, and realize that even in the middle of chaos, there's a chance to connect with others.
Yeah, it's not about trying to be fearless. It's about learning to live with that fear, and maybe even turn it into something useful, something that makes you more human, and maybe, just maybe, something that gives you hope.